Good morning, everyone. We are working on the commentary um, for a treatise on white magic. And we're on the 14th rule, actually, already, and about 40 or 50 pages left to go in the book. And we're dealing with program 10, and it's the fourth program for rule 14. The transition paragraph, the adept speaks no word which can hurt, harm, or wound. Therefore, he has to learn the meaning of speech in the midst of life's turmoil. He wastes no time in self-pity or self-justification, for he knows the law has placed him where he is and where he can best serve, and has learnt that difficulties are ever of a man's own making and the result of his own mental attitude. If the incentive to justify himself occurs, he recognizes it as a temptation to be avoided. He realizes that each word spoken, each deed undertaken, every look, even every look, and thought has its effect for good or evil upon the group. So I guess a very scrupulous attention to all that is emanating from us. Is it not apparent why so few achieve and so many fail? Well, we've been dealing with inquire the way, obey the inward impulses of the soul, pay no attention to the worldly wisdom and sagacity, and finally, the most difficult of all, which we've just been working on, to set an example. So now we come to a new section, and the subject, as we can see, is of great interest to so many people because they realize that in some way this matter is connected with their spiritual progress, with their ability to locate, access, assimilate, energize, and distribute the various energies with which they have to work, and of course energies which affect them and with which they cannot yet wield. So this is called the awakening of the centers. And let's see what the master has to say. Speaking more technically and therefore warranting the use of the word instructions in connection with this treatise for aspirants and disciples, it must be carefully borne in mind that the main task of the aspirant is the handling of energies both in himself and in the world of physical phenomena and externalization. All right, everything is put in terms of energies. The fifth ray is at work in this energy-specific type of instruction. Okay, and hopefully we can, yeah, that worked. This consequently involves an understanding of the centers and of their awakening. Now, we know that Master DK has given a tremendous amount of material on the centers scattered throughout his books. He even warned us, about compiling it all together for any kind of publication. We can, I suppose, use these compilations on our own, and maybe no ill effect will come, but for the general public, we must not compile all that he has said and release it in any way for publication, because the dangers are too great. People just begin unwise experimentation with the fires of their energy system, and delay and disaster can result. This consequently involves an understanding of the centers and their awakening, but understanding must come first, and the awakening at a much later date in the sequence of time. Note that. That's very interesting that the word much later is applied. So we don't presume that immediately following understanding will come the opportunity to apply effectively what is understood. And that is the way it is supposed to be, given the dangers involved. And I'm sure that, he'll be talking about that in this section. So this awakening, we're interested in this, but we have to be patient about it. The awakening will fall into two stages. First, there is the stage wherein, by the practice of a disciplined life and by the purification of the thought life, the 7 centers, these are the major centers, are automatically brought into a right condition of rhythm, vitality, and vibratory activity. So this is by the practice of a disciplined life and a purification of thought life, because energy does follow thought, and if the thought life is not purified, the lower centers will be unduly activated, and while they can work as the support of the higher centers, we cannot direct our attention to the lower centers. Their time basically has passed or is passing. This stage involves no danger, and there is no directed thought in connection with the centers permitted to the aspirant. Now, notice in some of Master DK's meditations, directed thought is offered, but then this directed thought is given to accepted disciples or disciples. It is assumed that among those who are really training with him are to be found disciples and even peripheral members of his ashram. So anyway, no danger is involved in this first method, which is an indirect method, let's just call it an indirect method. By that I mean he is not allowed to concentrate his mind upon any one center, nor may he seek to awaken or energize them. So already Master DK has given more than he is here suggesting is possible to the aspirant. He must remain engrossed with the problem of purifying the bodies in which the centers are found, which are primarily the astral, etheric, and physical body. Now, do remember that there are centers found in the astral body, and if we look here, let's see. So here we are, and maybe I think you have to make sure that, yeah, there it is. Here are the centers diagrammed, and we see that in the astral body they are found in the mental body too. And beyond that, we deal with the powers of the egoic lotus. And such centers as there are, and no doubt there are these vortices found upon the Buddhic plane, atmic, monadic, and even logoic, we do not deal with them. Not yet, anyway. We have so much to purify and bring into right relation regarding the lower centers, of which there appear to be 7 plus 7 plus 4, 18. And other aspects as well, permanent atoms and petals of the egoic lotus, which can be, I think, worked with as sources of energy. They're not simply passive and receptive. They do intervene, they do radiate into the condition of the lower man. Now, where are we here? Okay. So he's not allowed to concentrate his mind upon any one center, nor may he seek to awaken or energize them. You kind of wonder, can he concentrate his mind upon a triangle of centers? Maybe that would spare the undue emphasis. He must remain engrossed with the problem of purifying the bodies in which the centers are found, which are primarily the astral, etheric, and physical bodies. And let's just say no etheric centers are found in the physical body per se, but glands are there found. Remembering ever that the endocrine system and the 7 major glands in particular are the effectual externalizations of the 7 major centers. In this stage, the aspirant is working all around the centers and is dealing with their environing matter and with the living substance which completely surrounds them. So this is the first stage, and notice he did not, first he began talking about aspirants and disciples, but later he's talking only about aspirants. You see, the very first sentence tells us this is for aspirants and disciples, but then he reverted to the word aspirants with regard to this first stage of awakening, and let's see if he maintains that or uses the word disciples at any point. Anyway, this working around the centers is all that is safe at first. This is all that can be safely undertaken by the majority. Maybe there are some who can, under instruction, do more. We know that Charles Leadbeater was under instruction from one of the masters, maybe Master K.H., maybe Master D.K. to a certain extent, and that they taught him how to utilize certain centers, but he was a person of significant attainment. At least that's what Master D.K. tells us, someone whose attainment could not be doubted. So by the majority, that's all that can be safely undertaken, and it is with this stage that the bulk of aspirants in the world today are engaged, and with which they must remain engaged for a long And let's hope that that is not a long time to come. Sometimes you discover here where there are going to be mistakes in the CD-ROM. Well, always in occultism, patience must be exerted. The promise of the unfoldment of certain potentials is so great that the aspirant to these states may feel highly enthused and motivated towards their attainment. But, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. This is really so on the path of occultism, and when climbing a mountain, you better make sure that every foot is well placed, every step is well placed. Otherwise, you could come tumbling down. So, we are embarked upon a process which is demanding and has its well thought out rules, which have been preserved for us. We don't need to obey them, but then if we don't, our likelihood of achievement is much reduced. Now, the next one. Secondly, there is the stage wherein the centers, through the effective work of the earlier stage, note how he links these, become what is esoterically called released within the prison house. The moon is the prison of the soul and is ruling the lunar lords, the lunar vehicles. They can now become the subject, under proper direction by a teacher, of definite methods of awakening and of charging, so that their capacity to hold energy is greater. Just like a battery, a battery won't do much good. I think all of us are like rechargeable batteries, and we may run down and then have to be reconnected with a source that will not burn us up, but which will give us the kind of repository, or fill the repository, so that we can function again with the energy that had drained away. But the presence of a knowledgeable teacher is very important, one who has dealt with these matters, and basically we're talking about the master as the teacher. So the centers can now become the subject of definite methods of awakening and of charging, the methods differing according to the ray, personality, and egoic. So there's quite a technicality occurring here, and we can't just say, well, let's concentrate on this center and charge it up. There are sanctioned methods. So, depending upon the ray, personality ray, egoic ray of the aspirant, hence the difficulty of the subject and the impossibility of giving general and blanket rules. So this is, let's just say, this necessitates, right? This necessitates a more intimate method of work in the presence of a well-informed teacher, probably a master. Okay. Well, this is at the outset, so much caution is advised, and I suppose the average aspirant is unlikely to know why so much caution is advised until perhaps he gets himself into trouble. And as one of my colleagues and friends said, then there's the release of God's holy fire, and you burn. And this man spoke from experience. In occultism, it's better not to tempt fate and deal prematurely. Prematurity is a great danger in occultism. Premature exposure, a great danger. It is interesting here to note, even though it has no bearing on the matter of personal training, that this method, first of a long period of purification and later of energizing scientifically, is the one employed by the guiding hierarchy which stands behind world affairs. I guess, we had better realize we are in that long period of purification. And if involved with the scientific energizing of the centers, the one so involved is obviously not going to talk about it in general. So this is the method used by the watching hierarchy, the guiding hierarchy. Steadily they have been working at the task of clarifying world matter. This is illusion, glamour, Maya, and the work to bring those states into a more neutral and harmless condition. They've been working at the task of clarifying world matter and bringing about world purification on a large scale. Obviously, they're going to be extremely cautious about giving specific scientific methods to an unprepared humanity. And when you really, look at what the news conveys, you see how very unprepared we are in the majority. So this is the first stage of the work, and only became generally possible when man became a more truly thinking entity during the past centuries and on a wide level. So we might say this has been the purpose of hierarchy's approach to humanity during the recent centuries, a more mental focus from which understanding or greater esoteric understanding could be derived. So this purification is going on now in all the departments of human existence, for humanity now stands, or rather 3/5 of it stands, on the path of probation. Now that's one of those numbers which has to be kept in mind. I had forgotten that number, and it's an important one. 3/5 of humanity. And so when we talk about at least the world aspirant and maybe the world probationary disciple, that's where humanity is now. 3/5. That correlates quite well with the figures we're given about the judgment day, where 2/5 are shunted off to another location, another chain or a globe within the planetary scheme, or to Mars itself, and 3/5 continue on our planet because they have reached the point of actually treading the path. Through welfare and uplift movements and the wide spread of sanitation, the work goes forward, making human life more livable and less distracted by physical necessities. The widespread of sanitation, the work goes forward on the physical plane through political upheavals, which reveal abuses, through economic discontent, which is, after all, a striving to change that which is undesirable so as to give the human unit conditions of living which will lead to thought. Because, if you're just totally preoccupied with scraping out a living and making sure that your environment is minimally satisfactory, there's no time for real thought or any depth of thought, which will lead to thought and from thought to soul control. So you have to have a certain environment in which to pursue thought and soul control. And the economic discontent indicates maybe a subconscious realization, or maybe in some cases a conscious realization, that that kind of environment can be provided when there is economic improvement. Through religious propaganda and the efforts of many organizations and groups throughout the world, which hold before the minds of men what I might symbolically call, quote, the hope of heaven, using the word heaven as a symbol of perfection and of purity. The work of this stage is going steadily forward. So this is the following represents the first stage of purification and discipline, improvement of the vehicle, basically. And then all of these things going on in society, they're all spiritual, aren't they? I mean, they're not all religious. And that's one of the really important things to realize, that it is an achievement of the Black Lodge, which has made men think that only that which relates to church is spiritual. It's such a narrowing down of what spirituality really means. So along all these lines, the second ray, welfare and uplift, philanthropy, third ray, politics, first ray, economics, third ray, religion, second and sixth ray. Yeah, all of these movements in society, if we look closely at what went on for the workers during the 19th century, it was horrible. And they were abused and overworked, and there was little or no protection. And if they were knocked out of work for some reason or through injury, a hopeless situation arose within their families. Anyway, outrage was the result of examining the condition of the workers under the so-called robber barons, people who thought only of themselves and the accumulation of wealth, and who lived according to a certain social Darwinism that only the fittest survived economically. But ever since 1825, I believe that was the year in which the second ray cycle reached its midway point, and in which a Shambhala impact occurred, there have been greater means to uplift the average human being. And so all of this has been going steadily forward, and of course people can take it too far. We've been told, in connection with the third ray, that the movement of labor unions, so necessary at first, became in some instances too selfish, and then the masters had to de-emphasize their subjective support. So always the balance is needed. If you are on either side of the balance too far, then you will have conditions which cannot be abided, and hierarchy cannot promote that which brings imbalance. Even if they promote some revolution, the revolution is simply meant to restore balance. Well, so this has been a successful movement by and large, I suppose, along more or less along 7 ashramic lines. And he says, so successful has it been that now the filth and impurities which surround the world's soul, i.e. the world consciousness, and which keep humanity from its true expression, are known and recognized, and there is consequently a steady drive towards betterment. Well, to have the perspective of the master is a unique thing, and they see no cause for discouragement. We tend to be captivated by what appears in the foreground, and it's often times the process of eliminating that which is undesirable. It's in our face, and we are overcome by it, but they see the results of these purifications and eliminations and are not overcome by that painful period when there is an ejection, but first a recognition of all that is really holding back the world's soul. What does he call it? Filth and impurities. All has been brought to the surface. This is very Platonic, isn't it? In preparation for the reappearance of the Christ. Anytime you see the words brought to the surface, you know Pluto is involved here, even if undiscovered during those periods. We had, Vulcan hasn't been discovered by humanity per se. The priests know, and the inner workers, they know more than man exoterically knows, but Vulcan was very active as Hephaestus, Vulcan, in Greek mythology, and played a part in the pantheon of the gods. In those days, who were the blacksmiths and the armorers who were preparing what the warrior needed to enter into battle? Vulcan was at work. And probably we will find with heightened vision that some other planets have been at work all the time, but have not been focally in our attention. And we will then discover their location and their orbits and create ephemerides, and then we'll come to grips with their nature in a more focused manner. So all has been brought to the surface. It continues to be. And the result seems appalling and uncontrollable to those who only see the surface, but underneath, the deep river of purity and truth is flowing strong. I'm kind of amused because I'm always, I'm about one sentence ahead of myself here, having obviously read this all for a while, long ago maybe, and it has impressed me. And even though I'm not reading ahead to the sentence coming, in the context, the impression has been made. And then DK says it in the way it should be said. So anyway, not to be overwhelmed by the obvious friction and dis-ease. Dis-ease is so often an attempt to purify and to be clear. I had a friend, well, it's humorous, but he used to play with words, and he looked at the word pneumonia and said it'll make a new mania. It will make a new man of you. Well, but there's a truth hidden in that so often these diseases are an attempt of the body to rid itself, maybe attempt through the etheric body to rid the physical body of miasmas and other um, obstructions to the free flow of soul life. One evidence of the success of the world movement towards pure living and the destruction of that which hinders is that the work of the second stage is now in process of initiation, that we can even talk about entering that dangerous second stage is already an indication that something good has happened with respect to the discipline and purification necessary. The hierarchy, for the first time in world history, can now work directly with the centers in the body of humanity. Now, that's a big statement, especially when you think that there have been advanced civilizations well before ours, but as DK has said, it hasn't been the result of the thinking or the doing of the average individual who was probably pretty emotionally or still instinctually polarized. It has been the guides of the race who brought the elevated condition, and whether it was wise or not, various destructions did have to follow. The volcanic destructions of Lemuria and the floods of Atlantis, and now, who knows, the nuclear fires of the Aryan Age. But I'm heartened by that word attempt, because at least it gives the promise that the destruction of the Aryan race in the usual way may not occur. So humanity, the hierarchy can stimulate the throat, certainly, of humanity through the great educational movements, and can stimulate the aspiration in the solar plexus. It can stimulate the humanitarianism through the heart center. Those, I think, are probably three centers which have been stimulated by hierarchy, and also the sense of direction in the ajna center, although that needs clarification, and the ageless wisdom does hold the knowledge of that which will clarify. And, the head center, base of spine, things like that have to be worked out in the future, the sense of purpose and the will to accomplish it, found at the base of the spine, purpose being found at the highest head center. As far as the sacral center goes, it's very stimulated already due to the coming in of the seventh ray and the power of Uranus. And it's not even considered an authentic center, but some kind of temporary evocation. So hierarchy can instruct in the right use of the sacral center, but I think there's plenty of stimulation now regarding that center, and I can't conceive that hierarchy would stimulate that particular center. They would have to be selective about the solar plexus because it causes a lot of trouble. But the humanitarianism of the heart, yes, and the intelligence of the throat, yes, as long as it's balanced along with the heart and the sense of direction coming up. Where are we really all going, well, maybe that's not completely given yet as far as the majority of human beings are concerned. So anyway, the hierarchy for the first time in world history can now work directly with the centers in the body of humanity. Thus, we have the new formation of the new group of world servers who, in their totality, throughout the world, constitute the heart center and the center between the eyebrows of the etheric body of the human family. That's another important statement, because the new group of world servers usually is given to the Ajna center of Sanat Kumara anyway, but now we're talking about humanity. So the heart center in the member of the new group of world servers has to be much stimulated. That gives us a hint about their initiatory capacity, because at the second initiation, there's a great deal of elevation of solar plexus energy up to the heart. So the people who are part of that, they're supposed to even be on the lookout for those who are taking the first initiation and the second initiation. It does suggest that they have passed the second initiation, at least. But then there's quite a bit of diversity within those servers, and even higher initiates can be found within them. But it's interesting to me to think of the serving group as the heart center of the human family, and then as the Ajna center of Sanat Kumara. I guess to locate all of these belongingnesses, terrible word. The way that various groups are incorporated into entities of various scope. There is humanity, but then there is Sanat Kumara, and then there is the planetary logos. And I don't think we can talk much about what humanity is in relation to the solar logos, but those three areas, humanity has been identified as connected with the throat center too, in humanity. Or in the planet. Throat center and even the Ajna center. So all that has to be sorted out by some kind of systematic study. Suffice it to say, those in the new group of world servers, they have hearts. They have compassion. They have understanding, a Piscean thing related to one of the constellations there that bring in the second ray. The second ray is growing in those who are members of the new group of world servers. Somewhere I remember that Alice Bailey, I'm just quite sure she became at some point a third degree initiate, that she was involved in this elevation of the solar plexus center to the heart in her life. And you can see, from her autobiography, she's very honest, and she was kind of a Christian preacher during the First World War, and a bit fanatical, perhaps. I think she had 6-ray Mars in Leo rising in her chart, and a Leo ascendant, that's pretty well accepted. But the 6-ray was right there, so she had to be, in her own way, even though on the second ray, quite a warrior. And gradually the second ray had to overcome the 6th. But in these overcomings, it's not an ejection, it's an incorporation. Not an ejection, but an incorporation. And when, for instance, in esoteric astrology, we move from the orthodox to the esoteric ruler, we don't cast out the effects of the orthodox ruler. We incorporate those effects as subsidiaries to the new emphasis on the esoteric ruler, and so it goes when we reach the hierarchical ruler, we don't cast out the esoteric and even the earlier Orthodox ruler, but we make them sub-categories of the new emphasis. I think it's very interesting when you look at your life to figure out, what ruler particularly you may be responding to. I know in my own life as an Aries individual, Mars is there, and I certainly had a lot of it in so many ways, but then Mercury took over, and it's not that Mars subsides completely. It's very much there, but I think controlled by the esoteric ruler. Now, I'll let you know when Uranus starts to control. Not yet. Through the one, spiritual life can begin to flow in and vitalize all the centers, and through the other, the vision can be seen and the inner world sensed and known. So these are two high qualities of the heart center and the ajna center. All right, so let's just say describing certain capacities of the heart center and then the ajna center. So spiritual life can begin to flow in through the heart because it's so connected with the Buddhic plane eventually. Heart, Buddhic plane, and heart in the head, I would say monadic plane, and head center as a whole, atmic plane, and everything together, logoic plane. So through the one, the spiritual life, through the heart, the spiritual life can begin to flow in and vitalize all the centers, and through the other, the vision can be seen. There's so many rays at work at the ajna center, as you begin to see when you look at the ajna center on the astral plane, as well as that on the etheric plane. The vision can be seen and the inner world sensed and known. And it's interesting, this higher psychism, in which the third eye is active and the inner world can be sensed and known. The third eye begins to blend with the testimony of the Ajna center, and that's occurring at the third initiation, which initiation emphasizes the fifth ray and the Ajna center. Every initiation has its own emphasis, right? So heart is it's active at the first initiation, but so is sacral to throat. And at the second initiation, solar plexus and heart. But again, sacral to throat continues, and a new emphasis upon the mentality of the sacral center. Third initiation, it's the ajna center, fifth ray. Fourth initiation, it's really the heart center and the fourth ray. The heart seems always to get involved in it, and meanwhile, Pluto has been stirring at the base of the spine ever since the third initiation. And fifth initiation, it is the base of the spine and Pluto. And maybe sixth initiation gives us the whole purpose factor operating in the highest head center and the many centers included within that head center. And then I suppose the seventh initiation just takes everything etherically as far as it can go. As to how initiation proceeds on the cosmic astral plane, well, we know that it must, because initiation is the means of retraction along the emanative line and coming back to the higher states where we are more and more ourselves. So initiation opens many doors, but we can't really talk about it in relation to the cosmic astral plane except to know that it does happen. If we get too far ahead of ourselves, it may be stimulating, but we will not have built properly to actually achieve those higher states. We'll just be talking about them while we ignore the actual building and purifying work that has to be done right here. I would like here to point out two other matters and so clarify the entire situation. There is much confusion on the subject of the centers and much erroneous teaching, leading many astray and causing a great deal of misapprehension. The appropriating ideas wrongly, misapprehension, taking in under a false flag, sort of, what is being offered. So let's see what he considers erroneous teaching to be, because this is one big area where everybody wants to dive in immediately and start working with the Kundalini so as to achieve some sort of ambition or personal elevation as rapidly as possible. The motive is wrong and the method is wrong and rushed and it's dangerous. Well, sadder but wiser. One realizes these things maybe after getting a bit burnt. So what we're looking at here is looking at the subject of the centers and possible erroneous teaching, So first, I don't think I'm ever going to master Master DK's system of outlining, because he can have subcategories which have subcategories which have subcategories, and then somewhere later, pages later in the book, he comes back to the original letter. I'll leave that to people who have more of the seventh ray, and occasionally I hope not to make too many mistakes in seeing the outline layout. Anyway, I would state that no work such as an effort to awaken the center should ever be undertaken whilst the aspirant is aware of definite impurities in his life or when the physical body is in poor condition or is diseased. You don't want to be doing your best work on the centers when you're suffering from the flu. Or, it just makes matters worse, and people are aware of persistent thoughts which have a negative connotation. They can be destructive to other people. They can be destructive to oneself. Anyway, one just has to refrain until those matters are cleared up, because otherwise an energizing of the negative can occur and one will be the victim of what has been energized. So no work upon the centers when there is recognized impurity and sickness. Neither should it be undertaken when the pressure of external circumstances is such that there is no place or opportunity for quiet and uninterrupted work. So we see the karma involved here. Can we set ourselves, our time aside for quiet and uninterrupted work? Can we be financially sustained or made arrangements to sustain ourselves during such a time of retreat? Because otherwise we have this real problem of interruption and discontinuity, and we know that strength and persistence and continuity all go together. You really want to build something strong, you have to have a continuous approach to it, but again, not excessive. Otherwise, you may destroy the very thing you're trying to build. It is essential that for the immediate and focused work on the centers, there should be the possibility of hours of seclusion and freedom from interruption. Well, maybe not everybody can afford that freedom, but then again, when entering the new esoteric schools, you can't do it until your karma allows you to do it. So maybe in this matter as well, the possibility of having sufficient time and seclusion, this is a question of one's merit, one's karmic merit, and the degree to which the system supports one in this endeavor. But it will not, the world doesn't owe anybody a living, and you will not be supported in this by the environment and the people surrounding unless there is sufficient merit to warrant that support. So hours of seclusion and freedom from interruption. This I cannot too strongly emphasize, and I do so in order to demonstrate to the eager student that at this period of our history, there are few whose lives permit of this seclusion, especially in the West. You know, the great yogi saint of Tibet. Now, I'm going to forget his name, and I know it all. I know it all the time. Well, I'm just going to have to let it pass. But his teacher Marpa foresaw that he would be meditating in cold caves in order to achieve what he had to achieve, and so taught him the method of Tumo yoga, whereby he could warm himself and melt the snow and have a sustainable environment in which to milarepa, okay, in which to meditate, milarepa. So there are many necessities, financial capacities, abilities of the energy system necessary to sustain this secluded life, and the demands, economic demands in the West are only rarely permitting this to happen. And many people who have the economic possibility, they don't care about it. So we're not there yet. And he, in the beginning, he talks about the disruption of life in the West and how it is unsuitable to cultivate occultism, as is the more settled atmosphere of certain places in the East. Now, the East is becoming so westernized that you kind of wonder about the ensuing chaos of it all. When you look at India and China, countries of over 1 billion people each, and first-rate countries, industrializing countries suffering from all the pollution that goes along with industrialization. So you begin to wonder, where are the places where one can find the necessary seclusion in which to work in this way? So hours of seclusion and of freedom from interruption, this I cannot too strongly emphasize, and I do so in order to demonstrate to the eager student at this period of our history that there are few whose lives permit of this seclusion. The eager beaver. I remember I once visited the famous astrologer Mark Edmund Jones. He was a Libran with Scorpio rising, lots of third ray, a real occultist, Sabian, Chaldean, something of that nature. And the one thing, he called me an eager beaver, and the one thing that he assured me is that I must never get involved in occultism. Well, okay. I thought it was strange at the time, but I don't know what he saw. Maybe I've stepped in where angels fear to tread. But anyway, it's interesting how one interprets a chart. Definitely the Aries type is the eager beaver. And all of us, driven by our aspiration and our vision of higher possibilities, have a certain amount of enthusiasm and eagerness which we must temper, lest we really hurt ourselves and others. So he's demonstrating to the eager student that at this period of our history, there are few whose lives permitted this seclusion. I think, every entry into the new schools, every student is tested out karmically by those who can see to see whether karmically they have the right or the necessary circumstance to enter the school. Well, that's how it will come. Right now, we're just learning. This is, however, a most beneficent circumstance and not one to be deplored. Only 1 in 1,000 aspirants is at the stage where he should begin to work with the energy in his centers, and perhaps even this estimate is too optimistic. Well, you can always count on Master DK for a sobering point of view. This was back, of course, we can say, oh, well, this was 90 years ago. Now, certainly more than 1 in 1,000 is ready to work with the centers, but maybe not. Better far that the aspirant serves and loves and works and disciplines himself, leaving his centers to develop and unfold more slowly and therefore more safely. Well, he's giving us the advice and he's warning us away from what so many people apparently developing themselves spiritually seem to think of as necessary. They really put the cart in front of the horse, So, okay. Unfold they inevitably will, and the slower and safer method is, in the vast majority of cases, the more rapid. It's that sort of second-ray dictum, make haste slowly. Roberto Assagioli, so much on the second ray, emphasized this. Everyone wants to make haste, and we are told that it is necessary to be organizing for speed. But we want to know how speed is really achieved. And apparently the slower way is the faster way. Premature unfoldment involves much loss of time and carries with it often the seeds of prolonged trouble, not just trouble, but ongoing trouble, really prolonged. So, sage advice we are receiving, and I'm just saying that this is probably the end of 1 hour and a bit more for 14.4 in our study of Rule 14. Okay. Now, I would have to say that any one of those actions or qualities which are to be developed first before working with the centers are demanding in themselves. Service is difficult, as DK has told us. We go to esoteric psychology too and look at the law of service and what service really is along the various ray lines, and we discover, well, so much that masquerades as service is not service at all. And loving, well, with real Christ love, how frequently is it found? It is found, of course, and it's found increasingly, but how frequently compared to aspiration and ambition and all of these things which point towards elevation, but which are not real love. And work, well, There are some hard-driving disciples, and the disciple really works. As DK said when he was sort of signing off, he said, "Work, my brothers." That's not the same thing as aspire, otherwise we get caught in the veil of aspiration, and we have the glamour of aspiration, the glamour of sending our emotions towards great objectives while not doing a thing. And then discipline, well, is it easy? Is it hard? It depends on what you're disciplining. So even before we get into focusing on the centers under wise guidance by an adequate teacher, we have difficult things to deal with right here in front of us. Service, love, work, and discipline. There will be unfoldment. We have to take the Master's word for that. Gradually, all the powers with which the soul is equipped will be our powers in the lower worlds as well as the higher. Yes, this will come. But are we patient? Sometimes I think about how do I achieve patience, because for the Aries type, it's terrible to try to achieve patience. And the study of infinity for me and infinite cyclicity has induced some patience. The idea is that we're trying to become what we already are forever. That induces patience. I think we'll all have our different ways of inducing a sufficient patience to really proceed wisely along the path. What is it for you? You know. Sometimes it's such a great love for others that one simply puts their needs ahead of one's own, as long as it may take. So find what it is that induces patience in your approach, because, I'm probably the last person that should be lecturing anything about that, but maybe I've found something that works for me, and you will find something that works for you also. Okay, so rapidity, slowness, speed, true speed, the right attitude, the avoiding of prematurity. It's the ego that wants to be there first. The little lower ego. When DK uses the word ego, he doesn't usually mean the personality. He talks about the personality, but in our society, we talk about the lower ego, and that wants to be first, first to the top of the mountain, first among others. But that is the wrong motive, and the sense of identity is incorrect. So if there's a rush forward based upon wanting to be noticed as first, we really have a problem with motivation. Our motivation is basically, let us be useful. Let us be useful to the hierarchy. Let us, as rapidly as possible and as truly as possible, join the ranks of hierarchy and serve the divine plan with real effectiveness. Well, DK lectured his group at first. He said, look, you're not here because of that. You're here because you think you can make progress, and you're interested in liberation, your own liberation. You're excited by the possibilities, but you're not here for the deep purpose of truly serving your fellow human beings. So let us be, when we're thinking of this question of speed, let us see what it is really that's driving us forward, and whether we will be able to proceed slowly on the basis that slowness leads to speed, and speed leads to an earlier entry into really effective service on behalf of our fellow human beings. Overstimulation of the brain cells is necessarily one of the results of the merging by an active will of the fires which circulate in the human body. Again, in that wonderful book, Esoteric Psychology 2, he does deal with the problem of overstimulation, and even the counterforce, the Black Lodge, uses drugs to over and under stimulate the aspirant so that the king at the center of it all, your real identity, your real beingness as an entity does not have control. And the elemental life, the lower unconscious blind life, runs away with your life, and you cannot stop it. So we have to be very careful. Probably overstimulation in occultism in some ways is a more dire possibility than insufficient stimulation. Well, we have tamas, it's under, we have rajas, it's over, and we have sattva of the gunas, it's balanced. The three gunas. So overstimulation of the brain cells is necessarily one of the results of the merging by an active will of the fires which circulate in the human body. Well, we know from conventional science how little of the brain's capacity we use, but he did call it overstimulation, not just the required stimulation. Such stimulation can produce insanity and the breaking down of the cellular structure of the brain. You just burn through the etheric webs and too much energy comes in and it fries you, fries your mechanism. And through the overactivity of the cell life can also induce that internal friction between them, which will eventuate in brain tumors and abscesses. This cannot be too strongly reiterated. I think nobody wants to go through what Master DK is just describing here. Notice how tumors seem to be related to friction. That is a hint about cancer, malignant conditions, what can we call it? Inflammation through friction. Inflammation is the source of many, many diseases, but the friction that causes the inflammation is sometimes not considered. So if we're such an eager beaver that we have to be exposed to these energies as rapidly and as constantly as possible, and meditate 8 or 10 hours a day and all the rest, we're going to really lay up trouble for ourselves, and we're going to retard our progress, as little as it may seem to be the case, because you say, I'm concentrating, I'm going to go faster. But why? And are you giving just consideration to the state of the form as your will pushes it forward? And probably not. So there's a lot of sadder but wiser considerations here, a lot of wisdom that has to go into the safe and rapid treading of the path. Okay. So this warning really cannot be too strongly reiterated. As the one eternal being, which is our ultimate identity, we have been forever. We can't say alive because we are life itself. So when you strip away all of the lesser identities, we, all of us as one being, are all and contain all and have generated all forever. This is the philosophy side, okay? So why then rush toward attainment? It's true that relatively we have to organize for speed, and there is a certain, within relativity and in this universe, a certain time-space schedule, and we have to honor that time-space schedule of the planetary logos, which is a higher aspect of ourselves. But ultimately, we have to dissolve the difference between all members of any hierarchy. Relatively, there is a distinction in power and scope, in capacity, all that. But absolutely, there is not. So when we rush forward, we ignore the fact that we have been isness forever and will be forever. There are a lot of really deep mysteries here, but we have to disidentify with definiteness. I suppose I'm speaking in the language of Neptune here. Finitude is relative. Definiteness and finitude go together. And there has to be a way that we abstract ourselves from identification with and as finitude, with and as boundedness or definiteness. And then in that process of disidentification, the rush forward disappears because we have already achieved forever, been forever, anything we can achieve. Well, some people don't like that point of view because they are so identified with finitude that they want the finitude to ever enlarge and become greater and greater. And in the relative world, of course, that does happen up to a certain limit. But beyond that, the realization of what we have always been, even though it's a paltry realization to the one that higher aspects of ourselves will have, is very important because it, well, in a way, it just changes everything. They onward move in life, it is said. Is that rule 6 in the rays and initiations? What does it mean to onward move in life? I guess to deepen your point of tension or intensify your point of tension so persistently that lesser fields of identification disappear until finally you're left with the one deity of cosmos, but that's just itself and infinitesimal. And that too disappears, and we returned, we, the one being forever, return to absolute infinitude and infinitely more to absoluteness. Okay, I've had a little opportunity to share some of the thoughts that have been going through my mind. Is it the result of the breaking down of the cellular structure producing insanity? I hope not. We just have to understand that time is not what we think it is. It's not the reality we think it is. And absoluteness is really ultimate. They say that kings and dictators and so forth like that kind of approach because they identify with the ultimate power, and it's as if the ultimate God has put them into power and so forth. But all of that is just an illusion. We are really, in the words of the Tibetan, we are microscopic man. How tiny we really are can sometimes be appreciated, and the old biblical question applies: what is man? I mean, speaking to God, that is, what is man that thou art mindful of him? It seems an easy thing to overlook, just the way there are tiny microbes and bacteria and lesser lives to which we pay no attention and which we overlook all the time. Well, now let's go on. We're dealing with the stimulation of the centers. We're dealing really with that form of yoga we call Laya Yoga. The underlying objective in all Laya Yoga work with the centers is based upon the fact that the energy of the cells which compose the body, or matter aspect, called in the Secret Doctrine and in the Treatise on Cosmic Fire, fire by friction. So fire by friction, well, there are different kinds of fire by friction, but always the matter aspect. When you start looking at our higher planes as merely very concrete planes compared to still higher categories, well, how high does fire by friction extend? Well, okay, that's, just a speculative thing. It's enough that fire by friction refers to what we normally call matter on the cosmic physical plane. Fire by friction must be blended with the fire of consciousness. So that's the second aspect, and the third aspect, blending. Solar fire, the fire of consciousness, wouldn't you say? This latter is the energy present in matter, yet different from the fire of matter itself, which underlies the entire nervous system, and because it is so, and because it so underlies, rather, it produces sensitivity and awareness. This, well, what is the exact relation, between consciousness and what we call matter? What are the interfaces? Is consciousness at all material? How does it really arise? There are deep questions, even about how consciousness uses matter. One of the simpler questions in the many. So this solar fire, it is the cause of response to contact. The idea of the sense of touch is involved here with solar fire. It is the cause of response to contact and confers the ability to register and record impression. So, let's proceed carefully here because important definitions are being offered of solar fire. The ways solar fire works. This fire is technically called solar fire, and when it blends with the fire of matter, now there's a word, blending. How many occult processes are covered by such a word as blending? And when it blends with the fire of matter and with electric fire of the highest divine aspect, then man's being comes into its fullest manifestation and the great work is completed. We have a triple blending to complete the great work, which is magic. Magic is called the great work. But it is a most dangerous undertaking when induced before the mechanism is ready to deal with it. And who can assess that? Not the aspiring student to magic, no, the proficient one, the one who is a well-established white magician with the necessary powers, can assess when the student is ready. Electric fire, well, we do know solar fire is radiatory, and electric fire has everything to do with the arcing attraction between the poles. It's a fire that takes all duality and unifies us into oneness. So let's put that down. Electric fire takes all duality, you might say apparent duality, and unifies it into the one. So under the electric fire of the monad, our program of identification is temporarily reaching a climax, although it necessarily has to go on and on in relation to the entire universe, and the two become one. The poles unite. Two become one. It's a bit like the fourth ray in that way, except it's probably much more sudden, dynamic, scintillating, electric, But at least, finally, electric fire tolerates no diversity, or at least the consideration that diversity is real. Because diversity, that sort of channeled transmission through Dr. Anna Kingsford, a friend of HPB, tried to undertake in Cosmic Fire why there should be creation at all. And something about it was so that, well, it's put in symbolic terms, so that God could apparently be also other than God. And so that, God would not be alone, all one. That seems to be the great fluctuation between in one way, between the one and the two. And from another perspective, a fluctuation between the absolute zero and the one. Now, how we want to assign those numbers, well, there are different ways of doing it. But Blavatsky speaks of it, and She says there's an oscillation. Let's see, HPB, HPB speaks, not exactly in these words, of the oscillation between no number and number. Now, can we really, the minute we conceptualize anything, can we really think of it as no number? Because we've thinged it, and it's become a thought. We've objectivized it, and any objectification really a zero? I mean, the absolute zero is absolute zero because it is what it is, but it's no thing per se with definite boundaries. There's some things to be worked out there about the 0, the 1, and the 2. But absolute zero is not nothing. Nothing is a great negation, and we might say that in that sense, nothing doesn't exist. No thing exists forever. But anyway, our mechanism has to be tuned up in order to receive the higher energies and the higher conceptions, the higher realizations. Mostly our mechanism is not ready. So we have to find the way to render it ready. And it has been done forever. The rendering ready of the mechanism, even, the universe has to be rendered ready to receive and express the divine thought of the universal logos. Well, we'll worry about the microcosmic picture first. Let's get what we appear to be ready. In Shakespeare, in Hamlet, the readiness is all. So let us move from this state which repels realization into the ready state which brings it into consciousness. This triple blending of the three fires, right? In the glamour meditation, we have the three lights of matter, mind, and soul. Blending the three together is archetypal. There's a triangle and there's a point within the triangle, and maybe it's a tetrahedron, with the elevated point. And somehow the three have to merge as one. And we even, in relation to the fifth ray, we say three minds unite as one, maybe synthetic mind. This triple blending can only be safely undertaken by the highly organized and rounded out person, and by one, it's like ray 7-5 and ray 2, rays 7-5, and I'm thinking about Jupiter and ray 2 here. It can only be undertaken by the highly organized and rounded out person, someone who has achieved much along the path of human development and is not a novice, It's not possible for the neophyte to approach this blending, and by one who has achieved the capacity to focus his attention in the head, and let's just call this the place of synthesis, and from that high point, direct the entire process of fusion and direct via the Ajna center or maybe brow center if they are distinct. Once the Kundalini has stimulated the highest head center, and from that high point direct the entire process of fusion. Well, I think, certainly people like ourselves, we're just getting used to a little bit of solar fire. We've lived the life of fire by friction for millions of years. We're not yet into electric fire. Maybe some flashes rarely occur. When you're looking for lightning to illuminate the darkened sky, well, maybe they don't come so often, and they come fast. And when they do come, you see something, but then they disappear, the lightning bolts. Well, Master Moria says we shouldn't have all the fires on the mountain blazing simultaneously. And I don't think we're going to get out of electric fire a kind of continuity. It's a first-rate fire, and it's used suddenly, spontaneously for crashing through. It's not like the sustained radiatory solar fire. So the triple blending is achieved from a high point of direction. And I want to say this is all achieved by the initiate. Lesser disciples cannot achieve it. This is all achieved by the initiate, who is going to be supervising the entire process of fusion. As I say, we're just learning to build the Antakarana, and we're not there yet. And even to lodge one's consciousness within a permanent atom of the spiritual triad is maybe more the prerogative of the Chohan of the seventh degree. So at least we kind of see the map and the path ahead, but we have to be realistic about where we stand. So all of this blending of the three, it involves the ability to withdraw the consciousness literally into the etheric body, and yet at the same time, why is the word the there? Same time, to preserve in full awareness a point of contact in the head, and from that point direct the automaton, the physical body. So it's a dual consciousness undertakes this process, directed from the head. This is occultism, and one thinks immediately of some of the great saints and sages who go into that unitive state we call samadhi, which I suppose apprehends as much of beingness as can be apprehended by the human being. And I don't say by any means that it's ultimate. Nirvana is but the beginning of the endless way. In the Evans Wentz book, it tells us that. So one of the faults of the human being is that he mistakes elevated temporary states for permanent states, and he forecloses his options and builds a boundary around himself, which is a mistaken boundary. So can we withdraw the consciousness into the etheric body, into the, I suppose, the etheric head center, and into the jewel in the very center of the heart within the head? And can we then, through this occult process, really become the director of the mechanism? This is another step. Most human beings are at the stage where what they think they are and the mechanism appear to be the same thing. So a certain, alchemical separation of the subject and the object is necessary before the reblending of the subject and the object, and the still deeper realization that whatever is perceived is the isness which is perceiving. It presupposes, if successful, certain etheric conditions in the body. And I think, let us examine the place where magic is wrought. But the etheric body is underlying the dense physical, and according to its activation and its rhythm, it is stimulating its expressions, such as the glands and the nervous system and the blood system in the physical body. So maybe that's what he means by certain etheric conditions in the body, really underlying the body. One of these is the process of burning through or destruction, partial or complete, of any obstructions found along the spinal cord which could prevent the free rising of the fire at the base of the spine, commonly called the Kundalini fire, which lies quiescent, latent, and potential at the lowest center. Well, we have heard of this burning through. It's essentially an etheric process. The Kundalini fire is essentially etheric, and when released, it can burn through etheric webs which prevent the entrance of the energies and forces of the astral plane and other still higher forces from reaching the etheric body and from affecting the physical mechanism. But the process of burning through itself has to be wisely regulated, otherwise you get all the things that DK has said, the frictions, the tumors, the insanities. What are insanities? I mean, probably the lower subplanes of the astral plane have been released into the consciousness. They haven't been warded off, and they are, the hellish worlds, the hell of the average believer. So extremely discordant and filled with all kinds of phenomena that the individual is not yet equipped to handle or to dispel or disperse, and then the individual becomes obsessed by these very aggressive, malevolent forces, hence the one aspect of the insanity. So the burning through, and with purification comes the possibility, increasingly, of the burning through of the protective barriers. There comes a time when they need no longer protect, but that the man must begin to integrate and unify his energy mechanism, but it's all a question of timing, right timing. And the supervising teacher knows and can see, and it's better to go along with what is seen rather than to rush into danger, into the path of danger. So the free rising of the fire from the base of the spine. It's commonly called the Kundalini fire, which lies quiescent. Mars is Kundalini latent, Mercury Kundalini active, Pluto in general, the power of Kundalini. Earth is the Kundalini of the solar system and has the same basic fourfold structure as the center of the base of the spine is portrayed as having. Saturn gets into the act too, I think, because it's such a physical anchor. There's much going on at the base of the spine, but from another point of view, every planet in the solar system can act upon every other planet and has its representatives on every other planet. Like in Shambhala, we have the representatives of all the planets. And so in a way, every chakra within the human system has the representation of every other chakra. Somehow every chakra is represented in every chakra. It's an analogy. And what that intricate structure may be, we're not going to know, but maybe if we discover how it is that certain planetary representatives work in Shambhala, we'll be able to analogize to the condition of the etheric body in the microcosm of the human being. So there it lies, latent potential. The dragon, has not come out of his lair. The dragon fire. Now, in one way, the negative dragon also hides, and you have to shoot the arrows of fiery aspiration into the cave to arouse all of this latent negativity stored over millennia. But from another point of view, the dragon is a beneficent force, which is why masters are called lesser dragons of wisdom, which is why a planetary logos is called a dragon of wisdom. And one can live one's whole life or many lives without realizing that the dragon is sleeping there at the bottom of the chakra system, guarding the treasure. The treasure is life itself, the energies which, when released, release greater participation in life and greater realization in life and being and reality. So for disciples of our type, we're sitting on top of the dragon, but the dragon is not yet stirring, the positive dragon. And until the path of initiation, which is emphasizing the first and seventh rays, you can go this way when you have the head in the base of the spine. First 771. Then comes the release of the power of the dragon, which will make of us eventually a master, uniting the base and the crown, and we will become lesser dragons of wisdom. All of this is understood as potential in the right conditioning and manipulation of the etheric body. However, there's such a science connected with it and so much danger of a premature disruption connected with it, so that one can be set back lifetimes and have to repair what one has unwisely torn apart through the premature release of the energies at the base of the spine. Something happened to our planetary logos in connection with the moon chain, and it kind of disorganized an aspect of his psyche, and we inherited that disorganization on our chain as what we might call madness, or chaotic states of relationship, chaotic states of consciousness. So one cannot be premature. So all of this is the sleeping serpent. which must arise and uncoil. It is from Sirius that the serpent religion has come, and if perchance Sirius does have something to do with the Ajna Center, since it has such a monastic, brilliant, fifth-rate component to it, we can realize that from the Ajna Center comes the ability to awaken and to direct the sleeping dragon in its arising. The serpent religion is coming from Sirius, because Sirius and the Ajna Center. I mean, there are ways in which Sirius, to me anyway, seems to suggest the highest head center of the 7 solar systems, of which ours is one, our sun or solar logos being the heart center, and ways in which Sirius seems to suggest the Ajna center of that great being. So we'll have to figure that out, Each center in the spine is separated from the one above it and the one below it by an interlaced protective web, of subtle energy, which is composed of a curious blend of etheric and gaseous substance. Now, isn't that interesting? So what he's saying here, he's saying the etheric web. Okay, I think I can make that one, EDW. Etheric web. This etheric web is not strictly etheric, but has some gaseous substance in it. There's this factor of joining ether and the dense physical through ignition, and the kinds of flaming forth that happens at the joining occurs in this interface between the lowest ether and the gaseous subplane. And maybe we can look for an analogy occurring between the higher mental plane and the intuitive plane. Some sort of release of energy, some blazing forth. So anyway, this is very important, that each is separated from the other, I suppose for the sake of wholesome development, because there can be interference from one chakra to another by an interlaced separation by an interlaced protective web, which is composed of a curious blend of etheric and gaseous substance. This, and there are several, this has to be burnt away and dissipated before there can be free play of the fires in the body. And this is the difference between the people who can work in relation to the subtle world and those who are still confined. A complete network of nadis and centers underlies and is the subtle counterpart of the nervous and endocrine systems. The idea has been put forward that for every atom or whatever particle is found in the dense physical vehicle, there is a corresponding higher archetypal causal particle or energy generating center in the etheric body. A complete network is there. A little clear thinking, therefore, will demonstrate the need for excessive care, for there will obviously lie a direct effect upon the external apparatus, and this in its turn will definitely affect what the psychologists call behavior. So the etheric body participates in the phenomena of external behavior. The different schools of psychology seem to be referenced here, and the behaviorist is one of those schools. There are 4 of these interlaced circular webs lying between the 5 centers found on the rod. There's the word, and so look for it in the biblical stories and in other mythological stories. Found between the 5 centers on the rod of the spinal column, such as follows: center and web, center and web, center and web, and then finally the center. Let's see how that would work. 4 of the interlaced circular webs, one between, let's speculate, between the base of spine center and the sacral, one between sacral and solar plexus, one between solar plexus and heart, and one between heart and throat, and those are the 5 that are along the rod. There are other and higher centers, but the spine ends at a certain point, no matter how it may connect with the head under occult circumstances. Okay, I think we can see the general layout and how these etheric webs, which are a blend of the lowest ether and gaseous substance, normally are protective and protecting one from what will ultimately become necessary, the right interplay of the centers. Until then, the center pretty much has to be developed in isolation. All right. Now he goes further in dealing with symbols, which represent etheric realities, and of which the nationals of any particular country have relatively no idea. This is much like the cross upon the Union Jack. See, all of the Scandinavian countries have the cross in various ways represented, reflecting their own flag. Lately, they've taken it off their airplanes for fear of the jihadis. It's too bad. It's provocative, but it's distinctive as well. So all of this is much like the cross of the Union Jack, which has always had an esoteric significance for the student and indicates a point in racial evolution. So let's see if we can I'm just trying to find the right. Now here is a picture of the Union Jack. I thought that DK had it somewhere in his illustrations. I think he does, but we have sort of the cardinal cross represented in a way: Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And we have the St. Andrew's cross here as well, the middle of Taurus, the middle of 15 degrees, let us say, of Leo, 15 of Scorpio, and 15 of Aquarius. The symbol, I think, for the common cross is not here. But what DK is saying about this, it indicates a point in racial evolution. This cross in the head separates the ajna center between the eyebrows from the head center, for it lies behind that center in the forehead, and at the same time forms a protective shield between the ajna and the throat centers. Now, in other words, what's happening here is that the etheric webs are represented, but they have to be burned through. They have to be burned through eventually so there can be complete circulation. Well, you know, we've heard as we study esoteric healing of the kind of circulation that must exist between the ajna, the head center, and the alta major, but it looks like the throat center is considered here a kind of a third center, head, ajna, head, and throat, although the alta and the throat are so close together that in some ways they may swing into each other's orbits, linking the energies of the torso with those of the head. So, you know, symbolism is everywhere around us, and let's say that some of those who conceived these symbols may have been consciously esoterically aware or tuned in an unconscious manner, but bringing through the esoteric knowledge. So the cross in the head separates the ajna center between the eyebrows from the head center, for it lies behind that center in the forehead. Well, yes, in a way, there is a point in the middle of the head around the pineal gland which represents the higher head center, and we can see how there would be a web separating those two. It's like a web separating the soul from the personality, or maybe even separating one day the monad from the soul-infused personality, because eventually the personality must absorb the soul energy, and the head center has more in it than that which represents only the soul. It does as well represent, in some of its aspects, the highest point in our energy system, the monad. And then there's another cross which divides the ajna from the throat. Let's see how that would work, you know, here and here, like that. Anyway, the idea is a free and full circulation of energy is required to make the human being a fully unfolded specimen and to fulfill the human spiritual divine potential. But the manner of the blending has to be from fire by friction to solar fire, which completed to a certain point begins to allow electric fire into the process. And the one who is seated behind it all as the director has to know how to connect these energies so that no danger to the mechanism overcomes it. These etheric webs are in reality disks rotating or revolving at specific rates, which differ for the different centers. And according to the point in evolution of the system of centers concerned. Well, what do we have here? This is a miniature solar system. The numbers are of great interest and would reveal the integration and coherence of the whole. Well, he's certainly not going to tell us what these rates of rotation are, but it's really interesting to see that they do exist and that the chakras are like planets themselves. You kind of wonder, analogizing in a solar system, what kind of etheric webs exist solar systemically to separate one planet from another, given that they are chakras? And we can, what is the ajna center? Is it Mercury? What is the throat center? Is it Saturn? It seems a long way. The head center is in a way Vulcan, but at different times, according to the law of mutation, that which a planet represents, chakrically speaking, changes. Venus can represent the solar plexus center in a solar system, but it has much to do with the heart center. Mercury has much to do with the throat center as well as the ajna center. And Venus, although Venus represents the ajna center of man, in relation to the solar logos, it is more the heart solar plexus connection, because it is keyed more to its monadic ray, or monadic rays, kind of 2 and 6. So there's mutation going on all the time, and if there are protective etheric webs in man, there have to be protective and etheric webs in the solar system and in the planet, separating globe from globe within a chain, and chain from chain within a planetary scheme. So very interesting about these structures, and they would all have, of course, their own specific rates. He says rotating or revolving, I guess, for me it looks more like rotating, because they're not, changing positions relative to various chakras. The planets both rotate and revolve, but these webs within the etheric vehicle of man, they rotate. Okay. So look at the occultism that is hidden here in the way that man can scientifically evolve. It's just the ABCs, isn't it, that we're being given? But the hints are there. We've got a miniature solar system in our etheric body, and also in the etheric portion of the other planes, and it has to be integrated. And it's all of this integration is both mathematical and musical. So there's so much to learn about when we are ready for the circulation of the energies, and when we are ready to have the protective webs burned away so there can be the circulation we need eventually. Only when these webs are burnt away by the ascending and descending fires, let's remember the descent, because what goes up must come down. There is probably quite a circulation here. Maybe according to the figure 8, I think that's an important symbolic figure. Can the true centers really be seen? It looks like they are covered by the webs in some manner. Many clairvoyants confuse the centers and their protective counterparts, for the latter have a radiance and light of their own. Well, this is, let's just say, what can we say here? A very detailed description of mutual activities within the etheric body of man. And, hinting at a true science of the etheric body. And it's a, we're just at that point where we're discovering that there is a bioelectric field and a kind of aura with different parts to it. But as far as a close study of the chakras and their dynamics, it hasn't really entered the minds of even intelligent researchers at this time. As the life achieves an increasingly high vibration through purification and discipline, okay, I've just got to make sure that my audio connection is adequate. Okay, I seem to be reconnected now. And so, if there's a bit of a space there, it's just the functioning of the program which decided to malfunction. Sorry about that. But I've been discussing the solar systemic nature on a miniature scale of our etheric system, and how liberation occurs through a burning process. Now, Uranus is said to rule the final burning ground. I think Uranus has much to do with the, ruling as it will the highest head center at a certain point, not just the sacral center, not just bringing seventh ray into the throat center, but the entire head center in a way. And Neptune may be the heart in the head center, second ray monadic Neptune. But Uranus is presenting us with a final burning ground, and every human being will have at a certain stage of etheric development a kind of final burning ground which will release the fires from the impediments presented by the etheric webs. Are they between the chakras, or do they form kind of a covering of the chakras? The diagram seems to show, circle slash, circle slash, circle slash, etc., that they are between, but I think they are very close and form a kind of covering which prevents the full stimulation of the chakra until these webs are burned through. As the life achieves an increasingly high vibration through purification and discipline, let's just say frequency increases through purity and discipline, and that's really important to realize. The fire of the soul, which is literally the fire of the mind, causes the centers also to increase their vibration. And this increased activity sets up a contact with the protective webs or disks of pranic energy found on either side of them. Okay, either side. I think that answers the question. Not surrounding them so much, but placed on either side. I think we're going to get a lot of details here. Not as many as there are, but many concerning the etheric body of man. So let's remember that we are increasing the quality of our substance through purification and discipline, and that the fire of the soul will stimulate the centers to increase their own vibration, and that is interesting. And then contact is made with the etheric webs, which will cause, I think, we'll be discussing here, the burning. Thus, through the interplay of the stimulated center and the web, or the disk, interplay of the soul-stimulated chakra and the protective disks, they are gradually worn away, so that in the course of time they become perforated. You know, if you want to perforate, you use the laser-like fifth ray. It is a very fiery ray in its own way, if I might use such an inadequate term. Well, he gives enough of a hint so we can imagine what is going on, but we cannot imagine fully. All right. It's very interesting, isn't it? You know, these dynamics over which we are not exerting any particular control except to purify and discipline at first, and then eventually perhaps apply soul energy to the chakra itself, which will happen anyway, but we accentuate it under the right teaching and guidance. So there's not only a burning through the web, but there is a wearing away, an attenuation, a perforation, if I might use, he says, such an inadequate term. Many aspirants feel convinced that they have raised the Kundalini fire at the base of the spine and are consequently making rapid progress, whereas all that they have accomplished is to burn or rub through the web at some point or other up the spine. That's why we need the guidance of one who can really see the whole situation. You know, it's not a theft from one's sense of independence to wisely wait for the master who can supervise the process safely. A sensation of burning or of pain in any part of the spine, when not due to physiological causes, is in the majority of cases due to the piercing of one or other of the webs through the activity of the centers allied to them, which the soul stimulates, you know, centers which the soul and its energy stimulates, and which later the man under guidance can stimulate. Okay, so maybe some have experienced the burning, but they will jump to conclusions. But those who guide the process, and it is a meticulous and arduous process, are relating to us what really is probably happening. A sensation of burning or of pain in any part of the spine, when not due to physiological causes, is in the majority of cases due to the piercing of one or other of the webs through the activity of the centers allied to them. Now, the thing is that we have to understand this way, that unless there is sufficient stimulation of the chakras, the burning through of a disc or web will not occur. Now, this happens very frequently in the case of women in connection with the solar plexus center, and with men in connection with the sacral center. You kind of wonder whether some of the diseases which result through the irritation of those areas around the solar plexus or the sacral center are not the result of this burning through, the various types of diseases which the aspirant will experience along the way. But it shows the difference in orientation. The men focused in the sacral center, women in the solar plexus center. Both these centers, as a result of evolutionary development, are exceedingly active and highly organized because they came first, of course. The sex response, particularly arising in Lemuria, and the solar plexus, the emotional response arising in Atlantis, and they've been with us a long, long time, and in our solar system, the planets which represent those centers will be more highly developed than the ones that represent the higher centers, and I think you can kind of see this. Let's see if yeah, there it is. Well, you can see that certain lesser planets have greater development than the generically represented Uranus and Neptune, which represent higher centers, probably finally in the head and the heart within the head, and the Tibetan isn't saying much except that they are sevenfold. No further geometrical representation is there, whereas it's very, very present in these other and lesser planets. Let's see, where's our friend Mars? Okay, well, it's a lot like the Earth until you study it carefully and you realize it isn't exactly like the Earth. Okay, now moving on. So men and women, okay, and how this burning and pain is experienced, the different way that burning and pain are experienced. And both these centers have been developing a long, long time. Maybe the base of the spine has been active in the beginning, but it doesn't reach its full development, I think, until the fifth initiation. It maybe starts things going with a sufficient vitality to remain in incarnation, and ends things as it sends the serpent to the very top. The will energy rising into the energy of purpose, and thus being able really to carry out the purpose. A sense, therefore, of burning and of pain in the back indicates usually undue activity in a center, which produces destructive results upon the protective apparatus and is no true indication of spiritual unfoldment or superiority. He's cutting us off at the pass, as they say, heading us off at the pass. He's foreclosing some of the speculations which people might have about their progress. Disease might result rather than spiritual progress, although sometimes I suppose spiritual progress is bought at the expense of some dis-ease within the mechanism, the instrument, as its customary rhythms and interactions are being disrupted in favor of new patterns. So it's no true indication, this burning of pain in the back. It may indicate the latter, maybe spiritual unfoldment and superiority, where there is a true spiritual growth. It should be remembered that where there is true spiritual growth, pain and danger are in this connection practically eliminated. Well, we just are learning how to view our own progress and how to view the progress of others should we be asked. Now, we do know that Krishnamurti underwent a drastic disciplining and purification, and he was being selected to be a vehicle for the overshadowing of Lord Maitreya, and his system really had to be brought into order, and it was a crash course, you might say. It was a hastened purification, and I guess he really, really suffered. He was being made fit to receive that very high vibration of the Lord Maitreya and somehow convey it, but the pain accompanied as well. So there are ordinary circumstances and there are special circumstances. But just because there's pain doesn't mean there's progress, okay? That's what I think he's intending to say here, even though the pain could indicate progress, but usually not. Practically eliminated, usually, when there is real spiritual unfoldment. Maybe when there's a forcing process, or when people unwisely, through certain breathing exercises, actually begin to force development as they think it is occurring, then the body reacts with pain. So I don't think we can generalize entirely on this matter. It's more on a case-by-case basis. There has been much talk, much loose talk, he says, about the raising of the Kundalini fire, and much misapprehension in the matter. Let's just say choosing the wrong implications. A misapprehension, you just failure to really understand. Okay, let's see if I want to spell this correctly. Let me assure you that it is most difficult to raise, and that can only be done by a definite act of the will through the intense mental focusing and concentrated attention of the man seated on the throne of consciousness in the head. Well, that throne of consciousness, I think, has to do with the Ajna center when its higher functions are being expressed. All centers have lower and higher functions. And once the head center has been stimulated, the higher head center, the Kundalini, as we see in some of the old drawings, continues down and settles here in the directing center. It's different from the use of the ajna center as the directing center before Kundalini has made the circuit in the head. And you know, when the Tibetans are wearing these sort of bristly or feathered, or I don't know what the material is, but it's part of their headdress, and it looks like some kind of brush that comes over the top of the head. This is really the symbol of certain of the chakras, a number of which are not even named in this Buddhist tradition, or at least in the books that we have received. So we are, this is the process of raising. The Masonic tradition has the teaching clearly held in its beautiful ritual of the raising of the great Master Mason. He's been sort of done in, attacked, killed by lower forces, but it becomes possible then for whatever the Master represents to raise this hidden and buried Mason. They notice, that he's in the earth, and they are able to pull him out. Only when there is united effort of a fivefold kind, and only after repeated failure, and this is shown in the ritual, does the vivifying life course through the entire body and bring to life the true man. Okay. Okay, so we've been learning then about the raising of the Kundalini fire, how difficult it is really to raise and how dangerous, and how the raising can be accomplished, but how often one mistakes the raising of the fire for the perforating of the web, which are protective and which prevent the chakras from being fully stimulated. So these are points which I would suggest it is important to review. DK says how really difficult it is to raise this fire, and he's told us a little bit about these webs, that they're a mixture of etheric and gaseous substance, and we pointed out that we have a whole system operating, a kind of a solar system operating within our own microcosmic etheric body, and there are definite rates of rotation involved for these discs, these protective discs, and also for the chakras themselves, I would guess. And those secrets of the rates and the numbers, they're not really passed on to us at this point. All right, so it's all a question of discipline and purification, and first much happens, which is simply the result of discipline and purification, and later there may be a supervised attention given to the chakras. DK tells us that most of us are protected because we haven't got the pertinacity, the persistence, the follow through to do ourselves any real danger or to damage, I should say. Now, that was the first point in general about the Kundalini fire, the chakras and the discs, which protect, and perforation of the web and burning through the web and correcting some, misconceptions. Because this field is filled with erroneous teaching. The blind really are leading the blind in this field. And so we really have to fasten onto someone we can trust. I believe that Master DK is such a teacher. And follow the sage advice of attempting to make haste slowly. The second point I would touch upon is that all this deeply esoteric work, that's for sure, deeply esoteric work. Here we are in one of the initial books, getting into very deep waters and pointing to us how we must understand what we're doing. And the understanding has to come first, long before the actual practice. And it's there, of course, that people tend to get impatient. So we've talked also a little bit about patience and the cause of patience and how each one has to evolve for himself that which will induce patience in the consciousness. All this deeply esoteric work must only proceed under the direction of a skilled teacher. Well, we have been talking about that, mentioning that. Maybe not enough. Platitudinously, the aspirant is told that when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. He then settles comfortably back and waits, or focuses his attention upon an attempt to attract, little humor here, attempt to attract the attention of some master, having apparently settled in his mind that he is ready or good enough. He naturally gives himself a spiritual prod at intervals and attends spasmodically to the work of discipline and purification, but steady and prolonged undeviating effort on the part of the aspirants is rare indeed. So Master DK, having observed many students, sees that this is what they do. It's a bit of overestimation here, a bit of pride, the assumption or presumption of readiness, and just waiting for the master who desperately needs him to bring himself into the student's field of attention. Well, in the case of Alice Bailey, it was so. They had worked together, so the story goes, and when Alice Bailey was a chela in the light, DK was a supervising disciple on the inner planes. So that takes us way back. And he did make his presence known to her, but I think that was unusual. Anyway, what DK is saying, don't work spasmodically on purification and discipline. Really work at it. He is saying we must really work steadily at discipline and purification. And the desirable attitude is prolonged, undeviating effort that is desirable. And it's very rare. So, not sounding easy, is it? and it's not meant to. That's why this kind of training, with the arcane school and with this work of the Tibetan is eliminated. People just can't stand it, They can't stand not being handed accomplishment with ease. The amount of work required looks daunting to them, and therefore they don't continue. It is indeed true that at the right moment the master will appear, but the right moment is contingent upon certain self-induced conditions. And maybe we can say that the aspirant is not in a position to know when readiness has come, just as we cannot know when the hour for the reappearance of the Christ has come. We must do our work at house cleaning, at sharing, at inducing peace in our human relations, in terms of our ordinary environment and in our communities and nations and internationally. Then the Christ has his own means of assessing the readiness. So we have to do certain things to make that right moment appear, which will certainly be recognized by the master. When the process of purification has become a lifelong habit, and when the aspirant can at will concentrate his consciousness in the head, when the light in the head shines forth, whether or not the aspirant will see it himself, and when the centers are active, then the master will take the man in hand. So again, we can't put the cart before the horse, can we? We have to do this apparently secondary thing and discipline ourselves, purify ourselves. This is before we really work upon the centers. Remember how he said, do that first and do it for a long time. And then, only then, can start the actual work upon the centers in a focal manner. Although it is interesting, maybe DK had a certain amount of trust in the group that he was working with, or maybe, Alice Bailey's supervision of them and his supervision through Alice Bailey of them was enough protection to give them certain exercises which were chakric in nature. Matter of fact, the third meditation in Dhyana 2 deals entirely with the chakras and raising the emphasis from the base to the crown and even beyond, even to the monad. So we have to trust. We don't sit around, attracting the master. He will see, and we must proceed with that which works. And what works is discipline and purification. In the meantime, he may have a vision of the master, or he may see a thought form of the master and may get much real good and inspiration from contact with the reflected reality, but it is not the master and does not indicate the stage of accepted discipleship. Well, okay, that's important and interesting just because one sees a thought form of the master does not mean that one is an accepted disciple. Through the medium, are we ready to submit ourselves to this kind of training? That's always the question. Just think what has been given over the last, during the 30 years from 1919 to 1949. The real thing, with many imitators afterwards, watering it down, just because they can't help it. And because their pride doesn't allow them to really focus on the demanding teaching and the demands of that demanding teaching. They somehow think they can offer something better, even though it's not authentic. And they get the distinction of being a source. The attention of the group is on them, and they like that. But as far as assimilating the real thing, well, the new presentation is coming, and we have only now 6.5 years until it arrives or begins to arrive. So it seems to me the part of wisdom to really attempt to assimilate what is here given. So through the medium of the light of the soul can be known. Let us gain experience with the light of the soul, through imagination, through meditation, whatever works. Therefore, seek the light of your own soul and know that soul is your director. Okay, who directs me? Well, the teacher on the physical plane, maybe to a certain extent. But really, each one of us is equipped with or without that teacher in person to follow the guidance of our own solar angel, who is, let us again remember, a member of the council chamber within the sun. That's a hugely exalted position for a being that once long ago was man and has undertaken sacrificially as a heart of fiery love to help the up-and-coming human beings. When soul contact is established, your own soul will, if I may so express it, introduce you to your master. That is that's a very interesting idea. Your own soul will, if I may so express it, introduce you to your master. With all due reverence, again, may I add a little more humor here, that the master waits not with eagerness to make your acquaintance. In the world of souls, your soul and his soul are allied and know essential unity, but in the world of human affairs and in the process of the great work, it should be remembered that when a master takes an aspirant into his group of disciples, that aspirant is for a long time a liability and oft a hindrance. Remember that it's only after passing the temptations in the desert that we are no longer considered a hazard to the master, to the ashram. Interesting when you look up the word hazard, and we find it applied to ourselves, even though we have decided we're really quite ready to be useful. But then the master will ask, I've been looking for the reference, what makes you so sure you are useful? So for a long time, we may be a drag, a liability upon the master. We may be. And hopefully we have the humility to realize this. It is so that within an ashram there are those who are assigned to protect the master from the outgoing waves of devotion or from the stream of thought that may be directed to the master by the eager, excited, enthused, new associate of the ashram, member of the ashram. Students overestimate themselves quite often, even when repudiating such an idea. They say, oh, no, I don't do that, and yet they do. Subjectively, they have a real liking for themselves. And here DK is speaking about himself when he was a young man, and the master pointed out a flaw in his character, and he protested mightily, and later found out that he was quite keen upon himself as a disciple, even though his ready response was that certainly he wasn't. So students overestimate themselves quite often, even when repudiating such an idea. Subjectively, they have a real liking for themselves and are frequently puzzled as to why the great ones give them no sign nor indicate their watching care. Well, layer after layer of our character is revealed on the path of occultism. Each sees and knows the villainy of each, in the rules of the road, and certainly the master sees and knows the villainy of each long before the other disciples see and know it. A master, well, before getting together the kinds of groups he did, he studied those people, those souls carefully, and studied the karma and studied the potential, and he knew, maybe, he did know, I think, what he was getting himself into. But I find it so amusing when he says, may, with all due reverence to your exalted self, again, may I add that the master waits not with eagerness to make your acquaintance. And then, of course, a very balanced statement follows. Yes, on the plane of soul, you're all the same, yes, but otherwise not. And you are a burden to the master. Okay, so why doesn't the master show up? People, the students are overestimating themselves. They deny the idea. They don't know what's in them. And why does the Great One give them no sign nor indicate their watching care? They, the masters, will not, and they need not until such time as the aspirant has used to the full the knowledge which he has gained from lesser teachers and from books and printed scriptures of the world. There's so much good material. So that's the question. Use what you have before you can expect the master to show up and interrupt his busy schedule by giving you more, still more and more. Students must attend to the immediate duty and prepare their mechanisms for service in the world, and should desist from wasting time looking for a master. They should achieve mastery where now they are defeated, and in the life of service and of struggle, they may then reach the point of such complete self-forgetfulness that the master may find no hindrance in his approach to them. So if we're especially keen upon ourselves, we set up a barrier between ourselves and the master's approach. And who would have suspected, Who would have suspected this is the case? Okay. Well, I think it's called, self-love. In popular psychology, we're told we have to love ourselves, but, which self? If we love our personal self, it is separative. And if we love our group conscious soul, identifying as it, we automatically love everybody else along with it. So we have to discriminate which self it is that is to be loved. It's not the lunar nature, nor is the lunar nature to be disrespected either, because it is that fitting instrument which is needed to express in the lower worlds. So, this final advice here, they should achieve mastery where they are now defeated, and let us estimate where we don't do such a good job of living as we should. And in the life of service and of struggle, not just resting back, say, okay, Master, recognize me. They will reach such a point of complete self-forgetfulness. They may then reach such a point of complete self-forgetfulness, and that is the real key, because then no barriers will be existing, that the Master may find no hindrance in his approach to them. Well, believe it or not, we're getting near the end of this particular chapter, and I think in this particular program I'll be able to finish it, and then we'll go on to number 15. It will be apparent, therefore, from the above, says the Tibetan, that I cannot give specific instructions as to the awakening of the centers and the burning of the etheric web, which may result in the release of energy, because there's not enough steady application to purification and discipline, and there's too much self-love of the wrong kind. And there's too many illusions about what it means to awaken the centers. There's not a balanced approach. Such information is too dangerous, and note this, too intriguing to be put in the hands of the general public, who are driven by desire for some new thing and lack right poise. There's a factor in harmlessness, perfect poise, and the needed mental development. Perfect poise, a completed point of view, divine understanding. The public is not yet sufficiently harmless. The time has come, however, when the fact that there is an energy body underlying the nervous system must be recognized by the world at large, and when the nature of the seven centers, their structure, reasonably structure, I guess, not the entirety of it, but maybe the number of petals, and what situations they control. Their structure and location should be grasped technically, and when the laws of their unfoldment should be widely known. Yes, this time has come, and it's amazing how it's possible to spare people the illusions with which they have been engaged when you just fill in the fundamentals of the ageless wisdom. Then many of the greater illusions melt away, and the glamorous too, and people begin to want to know more about the real thing instead of preoccupying themselves with systems of attainment which lead really nowhere. But more than this cannot yet be safely given. It's going to be given in private. It's going to be given intimately with trusted chelas. The intricate nature of this science, indeed, haven't we seen how many parts and pieces there are? DK sometimes just refuses to go further because he says it's just too intricate. But he's given us enough so that we understand that there is intricacy without understanding all of what that intricacy is. The intricate nature of this science of the centers is too great for general usefulness. I guess many people want not to exercise their mind excessively much, and they are put off by what is demanded of real occult research. The teaching to be given in any particular case and the method to be applied are dependent upon too many factors for a general rule and instruction to be given. It's on a case-by-case basis, and as I said, he really studied his students, and he knew what they needed, and he had to deliver understanding of that need to them in such a way that they would maybe acquiesce in his suggestions and not rebel and run away or act up, Some did, of course. They just couldn't stand having the truth delivered authoritatively. The ray and type, the sex and point in evolution must be considered, and also the balance of the centers. When he worked on the disciple, was it BSD, Herbert Adams, he produced a chart showing the relative unfoldment of the chakras, and indeed there was not much balance. The solar plexus was 75% unfolded. I think the Ajna center was 15% unfolded. Maybe the heart was 40%. There were big discrepancies. And I just want to point out, without saying too much more about it, because it's for them to say that we have a team of esoteric astrologers really doing the research on who these people were and how they lived and what their astrology was. Through the process of rectification, their astrology is being determined, and I think we'll have a much fuller picture of who it was Master DK tried to work with and how he tried to work and what were the liabilities of these people and how did they express in the world. And we'll begin to see that they had some degree of accomplishment, and many of them were in positions which were relatively higher. It's not really a personal quest that our astrological team is on. The personality is taken into consideration, but it's more the subtle energies and the cooperation between soul and personality that they're after. But they do try to ascertain who in the world these people were. All right, well, that is coming. The ray, the type, the sex, the point in evolution must be considered, and also the balance. And I would suppose that this question of balance is paramount, because there can be no true progress. There'll be a falling apart, a shaking apart. You know how it is with a machine. When it's running at full tilt in an unbalanced manner, it destroys itself, and thus it will be for a human being as well. So we have to take that into consideration, and always, as Libra is growing stronger in the planetary horoscope, okay, good, all of us can make better progress because we have a more balanced approach. By this, he says, by this I mean the consideration as to their overall overdevelopment in one case and underdevelopment in another, and as to whether there is a preponderance of the force below or above the diaphragm, or whether the main energy is concentrated in the central clearinghouse, the solar plexus. Well, as I said, that one individual, 75% solar plexus, 15% ajna, and you can understand that DK then was trying to train him in psychism, or the higher psychism, so the ajna center would begin to unfold. And those numbers exist for all of us. The master looking on can evaluate where we stand by percentage in the unfoldment of our chakra system and can note whether it is balanced or unbalanced. All of this is behind the scenes, and we are wisely guided and taken care of, and it's the part of wisdom to cooperate with that supervision. Okay, the quality and the brilliance of the light in the head has to be studied, for it indicates the measure of soul control and the relative purity of the vehicles, and the various etheric webs have to be carefully dealt with, and also the rate of vibration of the web and the center. You know, they have their own rates of rotation, and maybe vibration is different, but there are frequencies associated with each of these factors in the etheric body. A synchronization has to be set up, and this is most difficult to bring about. You know how sacral to throat and solar plexus to heart and eventually base of spine to the highest head center. These are only a few of the points that the teacher has to note, and it is apparent, therefore, that only a teacher who has achieved synthetic vision and can see a man whole, or as he really is, can give those instructions which will reverse the ancient rhythm of the centers, destroy without pain and danger the protective sheaths, and raise the kundalini fires from the base of the spine to the exit in the head. There are just so many factors to consider. So probably this is inducing in us a certain sense of humility. We just know we are not capable of seeing all these things and evaluating them. We're not capable of understanding the mathematics and the method of synchronization to be brought about in various individual cases. We're just not there yet. So only a teacher who has achieved synthetic vision, like the eye of Shiva, has to be open and can see a man whole, and we barely see ourselves whole, not really, or as he really is, see the man as he really is, can give the instruction. And what will this instruction do? These instructions will reverse the ancient rhythm of the centers, maybe even reverse their direction of rotation, destroy without pain and danger the protective sheaths, and raise the kundalini fire from the base of the spine to the exit in the head, to be completed at the fifth initiation. Well, humility, an adjusted sense of right proportion. And when we're undertaking occult study, and this being one of the foundational books, worked into the Arcane School curriculum by Alice Bailey and approved by Master DK, when we're at the outset, we have to have sound principles to guide us before getting into all the fascinating information about this and that. I mean, really, we have to be stable in our approach to our development and our service that will result upon effective development. We have to make haste slowly. We have to tread the path selflessly. None of it is easy, and all of it is worth it. I mean, what is worth more, to be restored to one's own true identity and no longer be imprisoned in this sepulcher of form inherited from the previous solar system, but do good by that form. In other words, raise the vibration, the frequency of these lives in which our consciousness is entombed. So we're being given a very great advantage. I go all the way back, somehow flashed in my mind, that day that as a young man of maybe 20 years old, I set out for a dance rehearsal, folk dance rehearsal, and never got there because I turned and I found a teacher who taught me deep things for 7 years before he passed on. This was in 1962. So this was 56 years ago. Why did I think of that? Well, the teacher. There are many teachers, and they have different things to teach people, and we have to be teachable. And I think we would all be surprised as to how unteachable we really are at certain points in our life, how filled we are with our own erroneous thoughts, illusions, and quests after what is unworthy. There's just no room for the real perspective to enter in. So there has to be an emptying out, and there will be friction as that which is within the consciousness struggles to keep its place against what is new and better. I'm glad I had 7 years of this powerful teaching on identification, really. When I look back, I see that's what it was really all about. It wasn't so much about the details, as he once said, no, look, there's 10,000 things I don't know, but of the principles I am sure. He had a lot of first ray, and I've sometimes wondered, amusing, I guess, whether I would go back to that place in the University of Michigan where I first met him and sit myself down on the same bench, as it's not going to move. They are made of stone, and they're fixtures of that place. It was a place where the crosses came together. It's interesting. It's called the diagonal or the diag, and many paths led right into that place, the diag. And I guess occultly it was meaningful. And I thought maybe, well, one day I'll go back there and I'll just sit myself down in the sort of February, March weather, which wasn't too bad at the time, and see if anybody comes my way. Then maybe I would repeat the very thing that he first said to me, putting his hand on the cement bench. It was a bench of a kind, made of cement. And the first thing, the more it resists, the more it burns, or the hotter it gets, So there's the whole story of our old atom, our recalcitrant lunar nature resisting the inflow of the soul and the heating up that occurs in this resistance and the friction and all the pain as that which is earlier is replaced by the newer energies. The moon is, in that sense, replaced by the sun. It's funny how things come together, after a long time, the two ends of the stick, they meet and the circle is complete. You think you're on a linear path, but really it's a circular path turning into a spiral path and leading forward. And that was the symbol on his grave, too. He died in 1969. Just a circle with a dot. I think, the two students who were prominent there, the founder of the Matrix astrology program, and I was away, and he saw to the necessities, and he just put the symbol of the sun right there on the grave. And with Leo rising, it was very appropriate, for this individual. Well, reminiscence. But, we all have to figure out what it is that inspires us. Where do we get our inspiration? Where do our paths change from a less productive path to a path of potential illumination? And I think, we can detect when we took the road less traveled, in the words of Robert Frost. So the circle runs its full course. Such teachers, says DK, are found by the pupil. Okay, well, one of those little interruptions. But such teachers are found by the pupil when he has carried forward his life work under the direction of his soul, and when he has grasped the theory of the science of the centers and has mastered and controlled the astral nature and its corresponding center, the solar plexus. Well, it kind of looks like the second initiation would be required, because that's when the solar plexus center is controlled. And, you need that willpower that is developed as one approaches the second initiation. By that time, you've had plenty of chance probably to be an accepted disciple, and you're reasonably well read in the science. Maybe the practical knowledge is not yet yours, but you have to be at least, I would say, maybe an accepted disciple, but certainly a more advanced disciple for this contact to occur. Now, there was contact via Alice Bailey, and that was a mediating principle there. And it became possible for people who maybe we're not that far along to receive directly the teaching of the Master as an experiment. The emphasis laid upon the dominance of the Christ principle by Christianity has laid a sure foundation for the work to be done. Well, okay, I'm glad to hear that, because sometimes I've wondered, there's been such a distortion under Paul as he, according to the Tibetan, tried to reconcile the teachings of Christ with the old, as he calls it, the blood religion of the Jews. And, bringing in a bit of the Greek there as well. I mean, some of it is of value, but the simple message of the Christ got lost in a lot of theology. But anyway, the dominance of the Christ principle, this is the important thing, not all of the theology, the real energy, the mind as it is in Christ. This is the real thing. And I'm glad to see, it's heartening to see that a true, a sure foundation has been laid. This truth is curiously substantiated in the study of the number 8 in connection with the centers, which we are told is the number of the Christ. Well, there are 8 centers if the spleen is counted. All of them are multiples of 8, with the exception of the center at the base of the spine. Well, it's half of 8, which has 4 petals, 1/2 of 8. And in our day, and in the Anglo-Saxon mode of writing, the number 8 is the basic symbol of all the centers, for the petals are really in the form like a number of superimposed 8s. Well, I think we have to say the solar plexus is not a multiple of the number 8. It's got 10 petals, but 16 is, and multiples of the number 8. Okay. A number of them, I think, are, but certainly of the number 4, which is half of the 8, is, many are multiples of the number 4. Well, okay, I'll just have to let that pass for the moment. The number 8 is the basic symbol of all the centers, for the petals are really in form like a number of superimposed 8s. Okay, well, you can see how that would work in a circle, as we bring the connections together. They're all even numbered. In the future, it may not be so. The base of the spine, he discusses maybe a number 5 in the 5th round or something. Then we'll have a whole new numbering system. Anyway, superimposed 8s. Okay. The word petal is purely pictorial, and a center is formed on this pattern. First the circle, O, then 2 circles touching each other and therefore making an 8. That's one way of looking at it. Then as the petals increase in number, there is simply a growth of these double circles, because after all, let's just say a certain number of 8s go into each petal. And maybe 5, let's just say this being the structure of the petal, 2 8s go into the base of the spine, 3 8s into the sacral center, 3 8s into the spleen, 5 8s into the solar plexus, 6 8s into the heart center, 8 8s into the throat center, and 12 8s into the Ashen center. And okay, well, I've worked out the math on the big one, but you have 960, 960 petals there plus 12. And for the 960, it's 128 in various tiers. And for the heart center within the head, it's again 6 eighths. So maybe that's what he means by multiples, or the eight goes into each one of these petals. But in the ordinary sense of multiples, you can't multiply, well, you cannot multiply 8 and get the number of petals. You cannot multiply 8 by any number and get the number 6, and you cannot multiply 8 by any number and get the number 10. But given how the petals are structured, a number of 8s can fit into the structure of the petal. Anyway, it's simply a growth of these double circles superimposed at differing angles, one upon another, until we arrive at the 1,000 petals in the head. So let's just say what we have here is we have another intricate structure through this angularization. And, will that be revealed? I think it has to be seen. It has to be taught. We're given the generalities at this point. These centers are, in the last analysis, twofold in function. They demonstrate the form-building aspect of divinity, and through their activity, bring the outer form into manifestation. Then, towards the end of the evolutionary cycle, both in the macrocosm and the microcosm, they bring into expression the soul force and life and produce the incarnation of a fully revealed Son of God with all the powers and knowledge which divinity contains. So I would say both the soul and monad can work through them. The monad through the jewel found at the center of every chakra. Well, a new, for me, a reconfirmed respect for the incredible intricacy of this setup, this pattern, and how much caution there has to be when dealing with it. When you have a finely tuned machine of considerable complexity, you can't just sort of jump into its use, press the button and everything will work fine. You have to know what you're doing. And especially when it is organic in this sense, it's sensitive, it's ensouled. So maybe a new respect for the timing of all this unfoldment and the necessity of supervision in the unfoldment, the need for a reduction of haste, even though we do want to move rapidly, but we have to make haste slowly, and generally to have the right motive when dealing with all of these energies. So in this little section here, the awakening of the centers, we've seen how much is involved, but really the Christ principle is at the root of it all. First, the form is produced, and then the Christ energy radiates through these centers as the causal body becomes more and more filled with buddhi. Kind of wonder too, when you're looking, what role the figure eights have in the 12 petaled lotus of the egoic lotus, the 12 petaled egoic lotus. There are 12 petals, and but they are arranged a little differently based upon the number 3, so we don't have quite the same kind of opposition between the petals. It's fascinating and humbling. Okay. So now we have made our way to page 599. And if we go back, it's about 3 hours and a half here, something like that. If we go back, maybe we will see our originating 599, 581 to 599. Okay. And we'll just get this ready for our 15th and last rule. That number is related to the Kumaras. It sums to 6. The number 15 somehow is a Kumaric number. There are 5 of the almost liberated Kumaric groups, and 3 times 5 is the 15. We've been going for 3 hours and a half here. Of all the deep and detailed information, what can I say? What do we have? 10%? 10% if we're lucky. But it can be studied, and it can be studied carefully. And under the second ray, the needed pondering can be done. Well, maybe it's 598. That might be better. We're almost there. And here this will be 599 to who knows what. Another 40 pages or so. Maybe Rule 15 is a long one. I don't know. But I'm eager to complete this before leaving to the United States shortly. So this is going to be 14.4, I believe, and this is going to be finishing up 14.3, and it's Rule 14. Okay, friends, I think that should handle it. And if I can plow on ahead this evening, I will do so. But the last rule is looks like a demanding one, and ending with that exhortation, the call to service, and so forth. Yeah, we're at 599, and we go to 640. So there are 40 pages of text, and it's going to amount pretty much to 30 pages of documentation on the computer. And maybe there is a hope that some kind of semi-completion can happen, and that y'all can dive in, and make this book a real object of deep study. Okay, friends, that'll be it. And lots of love, many blessings, and let's assimilate. Let's assimilate the better to express in line with the divine plan.